Up on the balcony, Dara had seen and heard everything. She stormed down the grand, curving staircase, her silk robe trailing behind her like a cape of fire. "Esther!" Dara shouted, her voice echoing off the marble floors. Esther froze at the car door, her hand just inches from the handle. "Madam," she whispered, her body tensing. Before she could say another word, Dara was on her. She yanked Esther's arm, dragging her back from the gleaming black Mercedes. "Get away from there, you shameless girl," Dara screamed, her eyes blazing. "My husband is your boss, not your boyfriend." Carlos frowned, stepping between them. His voice was calm, but it had a steel edge. "Dara, stop this, you're embarrassing her." But Dara shoved Esther aside, sending the younger girl stumbling. "You think I don't know your plans?" Dara spat, jabbing a finger at Esther. "Waiting for me to make one mistake, waiting for your chance to replace me in this house." Esther shook her head quickly, tears already building in her eyes. "No, madam, I would never, I swear." "Shut up," Dara cut her short. But this story did not begin here. And before we dive into the full story, please subscribe to our channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to know how far this story is traveling. Grab your popcorn, because what you're about to hear will question everything you think you know about people. If you've done that, let's begin. To understand Esther's journey, we must go back to where it all started. Dara knew that look. It was the look of a thief. She stood on the sweeping balcony of her Lekki mansion, the morning sun warming her silk robe, but a cold fury was building inside her. Down below in the driveway, her husband Carlos was smiling at the maid. Not just a normal good morning smile. It was a smile that was soft, private, and dangerous. And the maid, Esther, was smiling back, her head bowed in that fake, shy way that Dara hated. This is the story of a girl who was given a gift, a kindness that would cost her more than she ever dreamed, and a wife who would burn down her own home to stop it. Carlos, a wealthy businessman whose name opened doors all over Lagos, looked at his maid. Esther was only 22, a quiet girl who drifted through the mansion like a shadow, always respectful, always cleaning. "Get ready, Esther," Carlos said, his voice smooth and kind. "I'll take you out for some shopping today." Esther blinked, her hands stopping their nervous twisting of her apron. "Shopping, sir, for me?" Carlos nodded, that same smile returning. "Yes, you've been working hard. Everything in this house is always in perfect order, and I know today is your birthday." Her entire face lit up, a sudden bright flash of disbelief and pure gratitude. "Ah, thank you, sir. God bless you, sir." She practically vibrated with excitement and rushed back inside to grab her small bag, the one she'd brought from her village. But she never made it. Up on the balcony, Dara had seen and heard everything. She stormed down the grand, curving staircase, her silk robe trailing behind her like a cape of fire. "Esther!" Dara shouted, her voice echoing off the marble floors. Esther froze at the car door, her hand just inches from the handle. "Madam," she whispered, her body tensing. Before she could say another word, Dara was on her. She yanked Esther's arm, dragging her back from the gleaming black Mercedes. "Get away from there, you shameless girl," Dara screamed, her eyes blazing. "My husband is your boss, not your boyfriend." Carlos frowned, stepping between them. His voice was calm, but it had a steel edge. "Dara, stop this, you're embarrassing her." But Dara shoved Esther aside, sending the younger girl stumbling. "You think I don't know your plans?" Dara spat, jabbing a finger at Esther. "Waiting for me to make one mistake, waiting for your chance to replace me in this house." Esther shook her head quickly, tears already building in her eyes. "No, madam, I would never, I swear." "Shut up," Dara cut her short. Esther clutched her small bag to her chest and fled back inside the house, her shoulders shaking. Carlos let out a long, deep sigh and turned to his wife. "Dara, did you really have to do that? Do you even know what today is?" "I don't care what today is," Dara said bitterly, pulling her robe tighter. "She's a maid, Carlos, a maid, and you want to be driving her around Lagos like she's some queen." "It's her birthday," Carlos replied firmly. "She works harder than anyone in this house, including you. Is it a crime to show a little kindness?" "Kindness?" Dara scoffed, the word sounding like poison. "Which boss takes his maid shopping for kindness, tell me?" Carlos just shook his head, his face tired. "You went too far, Dara." He walked away from her, his shoulders set, and went to his study. Moments later, he was knocking softly on Esther's small room in the servants' quarters. She opened it slowly, her eyes red and puffy from crying. "I'm sorry about what just happened," Carlos said gently. "You don't deserve to be treated like that." Esther lowered her gaze, looking at the floor. "It's fine, sir, I'm used to it." His frown deepened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick bundle of cash. 500,000 naira, he said, pressing it into her trembling hands. "Buy yourself some nice clothes, happy birthday." Esther gasped, her hands trembling so hard she almost dropped the money. "Sir, this is too much, I cannot take." "Take it," Carlos said, his voice firm but still kind. "And don't let what happened outside spoil your day." He gave her a faint smile and left for work. Esther sat on her thin bed, staring at the stack of notes in her lap. 500,000, more money than she had seen in her entire life. "God, thank you," she whispered, her tears starting again, but this time they were tears of shock and joy. But just then, Dara passed by. The door was slightly open and curiosity made her pause. She heard a faint sound like paper rustling. She pushed the door open without knocking and stepped inside. She caught Esther red-handed, counting the notes. "So," Dara shouted, and Esther sprang to her feet in pure panic. "This is what I suspected." "Madam, no, please, it's not what." "Shut your mouth," Dara slapped the bundle of cash clean out of Esther's hands. The 5,000 naira notes scattered across the floor like brown leaves. "So you've been milking my husband, right? Counting 500,000 like you're some Lagos big girl." "Madam, please, it was a birthday gift," Esther begged, bending down, scrambling to gather the money. "Birthday gift? My foot!" Dara snapped. She bent down quickly, grabbed the cash, and yanked the last few notes out of Esther's desperate hands. "You will not use my husband's money to flex while I am alive in this house. Do you hear me?" She stormed out, clutching the money, leaving Esther trembling on the cold floor, crying silently into her hands. By evening, Carlos returned home. The house was quiet, the air thick with unsaid words. Dinner was served at the long, polished dining table. Esther stood quietly at the side, her face pale, her eyes fixed on the wall. "Esther," Carlos said casually as he ate his soup, "did you get yourself those new clothes today?" Esther froze, her hand shook as she set down the serving spoon, making a small clink against the bowl. "No, sir." Carlos looked up, pausing with his spoon halfway to his mouth. "Why not? I gave you the money, did I?" Esther's voice was so low it was barely a whisper. She swallowed hard, her eyes darting to Dara, who sat across the table, sipping her wine as if nothing was wrong. I'm not with the money, sir." Carlos frowned. "What do you mean you're not with the money?" Esther took a shaky breath. Madam collected it from me." The fork dropped from Carlos's hand, clattering loudly against his expensive porcelain plate. He stared at Esther, his face blank with shock. Then, very slowly, he turned his head to look at his wife. "Dara," he said, his voice dangerously low, "did you take the money I gave her?" Dara didn't even flinch. She leaned back in her chair and swirled the red wine in her glass, a queen on her throne. "Yes, I did," she said, her voice dripping with challenge. "And what about it?" Carlos's eyes narrowed. "It was a birthday gift, Dara. Why would you humiliate her like that?" "She's a maid, Carlos," Dara said sharply, setting her glass down. "She cleans, she cooks, that's all. Since when did you start throwing 500,000 naira at housemaids like they're your mistresses?" Esther bowed her head, holding onto the tray in her trembling hands, wishing the floor would open up and swallow her. "Enough," Carlos said, his tone rising. "Don't twist this. I was showing kindness, but you've turned it into something else. Do you know how cruel you were today, dragging her like she's an animal, taking money that didn't belong to you?" Dara's lips curled in a mocking smile. "Oh, so now you're the savior of housemaids? Carlos the generous. Maybe I should just step aside and let you marry her since you're so invested in her happiness." Carlos slammed his hand flat on the table, making the cutlery jump. "Don't you ever talk like that again." Esther quickly excused herself, whispering, "Sir, madam, let me clear the kitchen," and she fled from the room. Just then, the sound of a car horn came from the gate. The guard opened it, and a sleek Toyota Corolla entered the compound. From it stepped a teenage girl in skinny jeans and braids, dragging a small suitcase behind her. Carlos stood up immediately, his anger forgotten for a moment. "Tommy," he said, rushing to the door. It was his daughter Tommy, 15 years old, the child from his first marriage. She hadn't been to Lagos in months, having lived mostly with her mother in Abuja. "Daddy," she said with a big grin, dropping her bag and hugging him tight. "Surprise, Mommy said I could spend 2 weeks with you." Carlos's face lit up with a genuine joy that hadn't been there all day. But the moment he glanced at Dara, he noticed her smile was forced, tight, and cold. It didn't reach her eyes. "Welcome, Tommy," Dara said flatly. "We didn't know you were coming." "Hey, my people, what's good? Fam, can you believe the audacity? The drama in this house is already on level 100 and we just got started. We've got Dara acting like a lioness guarding. Well, what is she really guarding? And now Tommy is in the house. She already clocked that fake smile. If you are feeling this story, if you are hooked on this drama, do me a favor, drop a like on this video right now. And I want to know, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. And if you haven't already, make sure you hit that subscribe button and join the family because you don't want to miss what happens next. Now let's get back to the story, because this house just got a new witness. Later that evening, Tommy sat in her new room, unpacking. She turned to Esther, who Carlos had sent to help her settle in. "You're the maid, right?" Tommy asked, her voice much softer than her stepmother's. "Yes, I am, Ma," Esther said with a little bow. Tommy frowned. "Why are your eyes so red? Have you been crying?" Esther hesitated, then forced a smile that didn't look real. "No, Ma, I'm fine, just tired." But Tommy wasn't convinced. She'd seen enough in her 15 years to know when someone was lying. "My dad is too kind," Tommy said, seemingly changing the subject as she folded a t-shirt. "If he sees you sad, he'll ask questions. Just tell me the truth. What happened?" Esther shook her head quickly. "Nothing, Ma, please don't worry about me." Downstairs, Carlos was in his study, the door closed, trying to get some work done. But Dara barged in, not even bothering to knock. "So, this is the kind of home you want to run," she said, her voice sharp with anger. "You defend the maid, you fight me in front of her, and now your daughter is here to see you siding with servants over your own wife. This is how you want it to be, right?" Carlos looked up from his laptop, his face calm, but his jaw was tight. "Dara, I am warning you, don't provoke me. That girl has done nothing wrong. You keep treating her like dirt and it needs to stop." Dara folded her arms, her eyes flashing. "Carlos, why would you want to take her out without even informing me? Since when do you start hiding things from your wife?" Carlos straightened in his chair, his voice now edged with authority. "Dara, I don't have to tell you everything. I am the head of this family. My decisions are valid and I don't need to explain myself to you for showing kindness." Her eyes narrowed to slits. "Valid, so humiliating me in my own house is valid. Giving 500,000 naira to the maid while your wife sits here, is that respect?" Carlos's jaw tightened, he leaned forward. "Dara, so that's why you took the money I gave her?" "Yes," she snapped. "And I will do it again if you keep giving her our money without my permission." Upstairs, Tommy had stepped into the hallway looking for the bathroom. She froze, her hand on the railing, listening to the echo of her father's raised voice and her stepmother's sharp, angry words floating up the stairs. And in that moment, Tommy realized something. This house wasn't as perfect as it looked from the outside. She crept closer to the top of the stairs, hidden by the shadows, and listened as the argument got hotter, the words turning into weapons. She wasn't just here for a holiday. She had walked right into the middle of a war. But was this a war her father was winning, or one he had already lost? The truth, she would soon learn, was far more complicated and far more dangerous than she could ever imagine. The laughter was sharp and cruel, and it cut right through the afternoon quiet of the Lekki mansion. "Dara, this is your maid," one of the women sneered, swirling her wine. "She looks too fresh, oh." Another woman, dripping in gold, let out a high-pitched laugh. "Be careful, my dear. Are you sure she's not enjoying your man's pocket?" And in the middle of it all sat Dara, a queen on her throne of cushions, smiling as her friends tore another human being apart. This wasn't just gossip. This was a blood sport, and Esther, standing there with a tray of drinks, was the prey. The morning after the big fight, the house had been wrapped in a thick, heavy silence. Tommy, waking up in her new room, felt it instantly. It was the kind of quiet that follows a storm, where the air is still electric and you know more rain is coming. She wandered the huge, empty-feeling house and found Esther in the kitchen, bent over the sink, scrubbing a pot that already looked clean. "Good morning," Tommy said warmly. Esther nearly jumped, her head snapping up. "Good morning, Ma." "Please," Tommy said, leaning against the counter. "You don't have to call me Ma, I'm just 15, call me Tommy." Esther hesitated, her hands still in the water. "All right, Tommy." Tommy was not one to waste time. She had heard the shouting, the anger in her father's voice, the venom in Dara's. "Listen," she said, lowering her voice, "you don't have to lie, I heard the fight last night about the money." Esther's eyes widened in panic. She quickly dried her hands on her apron, looking around as if Dara might materialize from the walls. "Please, Tommy, don't say anything, I don't want more trouble, please." Tommy's face softened, but her eyes were still serious. "I'm not here to make trouble, but I have to know, did she really take that money from you, the 500,000? Esther looked down at her feet, and her silence was all the answer Tommy needed. Finally, she gave a tiny, defeated nod. "Yes," she whispered, "but please, it's her money, it's her husband's money, I am nobody." "No," Tommy said, her frown deepening. "That's not fair, that was a gift, you work hard in this house, I can see it." Esther just gave a faint, sad smile and didn't answer. She turned back to the sink, her shoulders slumped, and Tommy knew the conversation was over. Later that day, while Carlos was at work, Dara decided to host her friends. The living room was suddenly full of loud chatter, the smell of expensive perfume, and the clinking of wine glasses. "Esther," Dara shouted, and the command echoed through the house. Esther rushed in, her face carefully blank. "Yes, madam." "Serve the drinks and be quick about it," Dara commanded, not even looking at her. Esther moved silently, pouring the wine with a steady hand, keeping her head bowed. That's when the attack began. "Dara, this is your maid," said Shade, a woman with sharp eyes. "She looks too fresh, oh." "Be careful, my dear," laughed Funk, the woman in gold. "Are you sure she's not enjoying your man's pocket?" The women burst into laughter, their eyes all turning to Esther, who froze, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "Don't mind her," Dara said, joining the laughter and rolling her eyes. "She thinks she's special just because my husband pities her." Esther's hand trembled, and a few drops of red wine spilled onto the polished silver tray. "See," Funk mocked, pointing. "She's even shaking, guilty conscience." The laughter filled the room again, louder this time. Esther quickly mumbled, "Excuse me, madam," set the tray down, and fled to the kitchen, blinking back hot, angry tears. But what none of them knew, what none of them ever thought to check, was that Tommy was standing halfway up the grand staircase, hidden from view. She had been coming down to get a bottle of water. She had seen the women. She had heard the words. She had seen the look on Esther's face. And her entire body went cold with a pure, quiet anger. She turned around and walked back to her room, her mind racing. "Hey my people, what is good, fam? Did you just see what I saw? Did you hear that? Guilty conscience? No, honey, that's called humiliation. My blood is boiling for Esther right now, and Dara is enjoying it. This is a different level of wickedness, fam." And Tommy saw it all, a witness. If you are hooked on this story, if your heart is beating fast like mine, please drop a like on this video. Let me know you're with me. And I want to know, what would you do if you were Tommy right now? Drop it in the comments. And as always, if you haven't, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Join this storytelling family because you know this is about to explode. Alright, the king is about to come home. Let's get back to the story, because this pot of soup is about to boil over. That evening, Carlos came home. The house was quiet again, the scent of perfume and wine long gone, replaced by the smell of dinner cooking. He found Tommy waiting for him, not in the living room, but in his study. She was sitting in his large leather chair, and she looked small, but her face was set and serious. "Daddy," she said firmly, before he could even loosen his tie. "You need to know what's going on in this house when you're not around." Carlos paused, his briefcase in hand. He studied her face, sensing the gravity. He sat down slowly on the chair opposite hers. "What are you talking about, Tommy?" "Stepmom," Tommy said, her voice clear and strong. "She had her friends over, and they embarrassed Esther. They laughed at her, they mocked her, and they called her names. They said she was enjoying your pocket." Carlos's face hardened, the tiredness from his day vanished, replaced by a cold anger. "Are you sure?" "Yes, Daddy," Tommy said, never looking away. I was on the stairs, I saw and heard everything. They treated her like she wasn't even a person, and Dara, she laughed with them, it was cruel. Carlos leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily. For a long time he didn't speak, his jaw tightening and untightening. Then he stood up. Where's Esther now? In her room, I think, Tommy replied. Carlos walked straight upstairs and knocked on Esther's door. She opened it timidly, her eyes still red, and her heart sank when she saw the look on his face. Esther, Carlos said, his voice quiet but heavy. Is it true? Did my wife and her friends insult you today? Esther lowered her gaze, her hands twisting in her apron. Sir, it's nothing, please, I'm used to it. Don't say that, Carlos said, his voice rising slightly. Nobody should get used to being humiliated, not in my house. Just then, Dara appeared at the end of the hallway, her arms folded tightly across her chest, her eyes narrowed. So, she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm, you've gone behind my back again, Carlos, sneaking around, defending her instead of putting her in her place. Carlos turned sharply, his control finally snapping. Dara, why did you embarrass her in front of your friends? What did she ever do to you to deserve that? Dara scoffed, tossing her hair over her shoulder as she walked towards them. Embarrass who? That girl? I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't lie to me, Carlos snapped, his voice firm and loud, echoing in the hall. Tommy saw everything, you mocked her and you let your friends laugh at her like she's trash. At the mention of Tommy's name, something in Dara's face changed. Her eyes turned from angry to volcanic. Tommy, so your daughter is your spy now? This is the family you want to run? Fine. Before Carlos could answer, she turned on her heel. Carlos, I am done with this. I am done with this marriage. She stormed into their master bedroom and Carlos rushed in after her, his frustration peaking. Dara, stop this madness. You can't just pack up and leave because of an argument. Let's talk about this. Talk, she shrieked, yanking her wardrobe open. Dresses and blouses came flying onto the bed as she pulled down hangers roughly. You always want to talk when it's about me, but when it's about her, she spat the word, you defend her like she's the queen of this house. I'm tired, Carlos, tired of competing with a maid in my own home. She grabbed a travel bag from under the bed, unzipped it, and started shoving clothes inside without folding, her breaths coming in fast, harsh pants. The zipper strained as she forced more in. Carlos stood frozen in the doorway, torn between anger and a strange desperation as she brushed past him, dragging the bag. At the front door, she stopped and turned, her face a mask of cold fury. If that's the kind of home you want, then enjoy it. Enjoy it with your stupid maid. She pulled the heavy door open, stepped out into the dark Lagos night and slammed it shut behind her. The sound was as final as a gunshot, echoing through the silent, stunned mansion. Carlos stood in the foyer staring at the door. From the top of the stairs, Tommy watched, her hand over her mouth, horrified, and from her room, Esther was trembling, having heard everything. Dara was gone, the house was quiet, but was the war over, or had she just changed the battlefield? The truth was, Dara hadn't just left, she had set a trap, and Carlos, Esther, and Tommy had just walked right into it. The slam of the front door was like a physical blow. It left a ringing, deafening silence in the mansion, a silence that was heavier and more terrifying than all the shouting. At the top of the stairs, Tommy had her hand over her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. Had she done this? Downstairs, Carlos stood in the grand foyer, staring at the door. His face was a mask of stone, but his hands were clenched so tight his knuckles were white. He was a man who controlled billion-naira deals, but he had just lost complete control of his own home. And in the servants' quarters, Esther was curled on her thin mattress, her hands over her ears, trembling. She had heard the final words, "Enjoy it with your stupid maid." Dara was gone, and Esther knew with a sickening certainty that everyone in this house and soon everyone outside it would blame her. The next morning, the house felt haunted. Dara's absence was a living, breathing thing. There was no loud voice, no sharp commands, no scent of expensive perfume in the air, just a tense, awkward quiet. Carlos, his face etched with stress, left for his study early, his jaw tight. Tommy wandered the big, empty halls, feeling like a visitor in a war zone. But it was Esther who felt the change the most. She felt like a ghost, terrified to be seen, terrified to be heard. She served breakfast with trembling hands, her eyes glued to the floor, expecting at any moment to be fired, to be thrown out, to be blamed for the collapse of a marriage she wanted no part of. She was cleaning the living room, dusting a large wedding photo of Carlos and Dara when Carlos found her. "Esther," he said, his voice startling her. She jumped, nearly dropping the duster. "Sir." He looked tired. He ran a hand over his face. "Esther, I want to apologize for everything, for my wife's behavior, for what happened with the money, for this whole situation. None of this is your fault." Esther just stared at him, unable to speak. "I know I can't undo her cruelty," he continued, "but I can fix this." He pulled out his wallet and took out his black credit card. "I'm going to replace the 500,000 naira, but this is better. Tommy is bored and you deserve a break. I want you to go with Tommy to the mall today." Esther's eyes widened. "Sir, go out." "Yes," he said, handing the card to Tommy, who had just walked in. "Tommy, take Esther, buy her what she needs, clothes, shoes, whatever she wants, and get something nice for yourself too. Just get out of this house for a few hours." Tommy's face lit up, understanding his plan. It wasn't just about the clothes, it was about making a statement. It was about showing kindness in the face of cruelty. "Yes, Daddy," she said, a small, determined smile on her face. At the Eco Mall, Esther was a fish out of water. She walked on the polished floors as if she were walking on glass, her eyes huge, overwhelmed by the lights, the music, the sheer amount of stuff. "Come on," Tommy said, grabbing her hand in a surprisingly sisterly way. "Let's start here." She pulled Esther into a bright, trendy clothing store. Esther instinctively reached for the simplest, cheapest-looking wrapper, but Tommy gently took it from her. "No," she said, not unkindly, "we're not buying more uniforms." Tommy was on a mission. She pulled dark-wash jeans, simple, colorful t-shirts, a pair of clean white sneakers, and a modest, pretty blue dress. "Go try them on," Tommy ordered. In the dressing room, Esther looked at herself in the mirror. She had never worn jeans in her life. She hesitantly pulled them on. They fit perfectly. She touched the soft cotton of the t-shirt. For the first time, she didn't see the maid. She saw Esther, a 22-year-old girl. When she stepped out, Tommy's grin was wide. "See, I knew it, you look amazing." Esther blushed, a small, hesitant smile touching her own lips. It was the first real smile anyone had seen from her in days. They left the mall with several bags, and for the first time since she'd arrived in Lagos, Esther felt a tiny, fragile seed of hope. That evening, she served dinner, but the cowering, invisible maid was gone. In her place was Esther, wearing her new jeans and a simple, lemon-yellow top. She was still respectful, still quiet, but her shoulders were back. She wasn't hiding. Carlos looked up from his plate and smiled, a genuine, fatherly smile. "The clothes look nice, Esther. Yellow suits you." "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. Tommy smiled into her jollof rice. The house, for just a moment, felt almost peaceful, almost. "Hey fam, what's good? Did you just see that? Our girl Esther got her glow up. And I am here for it, from the shadows to the spotlight. You love to see it. But hold on, y'all know a house like this. You know a man like Carlos, you know a woman like Dara. When you're in a lion's den, shining a little light on yourself doesn't make the lions go away. It just shows them exactly where to bite. Dara is gone, but do we really think she's gone for good? Or was that just round one? Let me know in the comments. Do you think this new confidence is a good thing for Esther, or is it just painting a bigger target on her back? Drop a like if you're feeling this transformation, and make sure you are subscribed, because the trap is about to spring. Let's get back to it. A few days passed. A new, awkward normal settled over the mansion. Carlos went to work. Tommy read books by the pool. Esther cooked and cleaned, but now she did it in her new clothes. The fear was still there, but it was quieter. The storm, it seemed, had passed. She was wrong. It was a hot, still afternoon. Carlos was at the office. Tommy was upstairs, music playing from her room. Esther was in the living room, wiping down the glass on the center table. The doorbell rang. She assumed it was just a delivery. She opened the heavy front door, and her blood turned to ice. It was Dara. But she was not alone. She was flanked by her two friends, Shade and Funk, who looked like vultures ready for a kill. And with them was an older, stern-looking woman Esther had never seen. This woman was dressed in traditional wrappers, a red head tie, and her eyes looked like they could see straight into your soul and find the dirt. Dara's face was a mask of fake tears and twisted, righteous anger. She pointed a long, manicured finger at Esther, her voice a wail for all the world to hear. "There she is, that is the girl, that is the witch who has destroyed my home." Before Esther could even form a word, Dara and her crew stormed into the foyer, pushing past her. The older woman, the mama, stepped forward, staring at Esther with an intense, unnerving gaze that made Esther's skin crawl. Dara's friends started their rehearsed chorus. "We saw it, Mama," Shade said, her voice full of fake pity. "The way she's been acting, the way she looks at him, it's not normal." Funk stepped in, her eyes wide with malice. "She's been using juju, it's the only explanation. How else does a common village maid get a big man like Carlos to throw his own wife out onto the street? She has tied him." "No," Esther finally found her voice, a high-pitched, terrified sound. "I didn't, I swear, madam, please, I didn't do anything." Dara, smirking through her performance, slapped her hand away. "Don't madam me, you husband snatcher, you snake, you thought you could win, you thought I would just walk away and leave my home for you." The older woman walked slowly into the center of the living room, ignoring Esther completely. She looked around, sniffing the air, her eyes scanning every corner. She turned back to Esther, who was now trembling so hard she could barely stand. "So," the woman said, her voice a low, powerful rumble, "this is where you've been doing your work." She stepped right up to Esther, so close Esther could smell the distinct, sharp scent of herbs and old camphor on her. The woman's eyes were cold, dead, and full of power. She lifted a small, worn leather pouch that was tied to her wrapper. "Dara has told me everything," the woman rumbled. "She told me how you've been serving him, how you give him his food, his water, his tea." Her eyes bored into Esther, "And I know exactly what kind of charm you used." The woman looked at Dara. "We will find it, it is here in this house." She turned back to Esther, a cruel, knowing smile twisting her lips. "And when we do?" Was this Dara's plan all along, to leave not in defeat but to gather her army, and what charm did they believe they would find? Or what were they planning to plant? Esther wasn't just fighting for her job anymore, she was fighting for her name, and in a house now full of witch hunters, she was fighting for her life. The first thing they tore apart was her dignity. The second thing was her room. "Please, madam, there is nothing," Esther cried, backing into her small servants' quarters as Dara, her friends, and the stern-faced mama advanced on her. "Silence, witch," Dara hissed, her eyes gleaming with a terrible, excited fire. "We will see for ourselves." This was not a search, it was an invasion. Dara, playing the part of the wronged wife, stood by the door with her arms crossed, a cruel smirk on her face. Her friends, Shade and Funk, acted as her hype women, muttering, "Jesus, Jesus, what a world," and "Look at her, pretending to be innocent." But the mama was the one doing the work. She was silent, focused, and terrifying. She moved with a slow, deliberate energy, her eyes scanning every corner. She picked up Esther's small, worn Bible from the nightstand, looked at it with contempt, and tossed it onto the floor. "Mama, please, that is my Bible," Esther sobbed. The mama ignored her. She went to the small wardrobe where Esther's few new clothes were hanging, the jeans, the yellow top, the blue dress. With one sweep of her arm, she scraped them all off their hangers. They fell into a heap on the floor and she kicked them aside. "You think you can hide your work under new clothes?" the mama rumbled, her voice like stones grinding together. "No, madam, please, I have nothing," Esther begged, tears streaming down her face. "Shut up and let her work," Dara snapped from the doorway. The mama moved to the bed. She grabbed the thin mattress and with surprising strength flipped it completely over, dumping the pillows and simple bedsheet onto the floor. She ran her hands along the wooden bed frame, her fingers probing, searching. The commotion was loud, the sound of the mattress hitting the floor, Esther's crying, and Dara's sharp commands. Upstairs, the music in Tommy's room had stopped. "What is going on?" Tommy stood at the end of the hall, her eyes wide, taking in the scene. Her stepmother, her two awful friends, a strange woman in traditional wrappers, and Esther, sobbing in the corner of her completely wrecked room. "Stepmom, what are you doing?" Tommy demanded, her voice shaking with teenage outrage. "Who are you people?" Shade, one of the friends, waved a dismissive hand. Small girl, go back to your room, this is adult business." "Tommy, I told you this doesn't concern you," Dara said, her voice sharp. We are cleansing this house of a spiritual attack." Tommy looked from the stern-faced mama to Esther, who was clutching her hands together as if in prayer. "Cleansing? You're not cleansing anything, you're bullying her, you're all crazy." "Go to your room, Tommy, or I will seize your phone," Dara threatened. But before the argument could go further, the mama, who had been kneeling by the small, rickety nightstand, suddenly went still, her head tilted as if listening to a sound no one else could hear. A slow, terrible smile spread across her face. "Found it," she whispered. She reached under the nightstand, her fingers feeling for something that was taped to the bottom, hidden from view. With a grunt, she ripped it free. She stood up slowly, her fist clenched. The room went absolutely deathly silent, even Esther's sobs choked off. The mama held her hand out, palm up. Lying in her hand was a small, tightly wound pouch made of black and red cloth. It looked old, dark, and deeply sinister. Esther's eyes widened in pure, unadulterated horror. "What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "That is not mine. I have never seen that thing in my life." "Abomination," the mama shouted, her voice suddenly booming in the small room. Dara's friends gasped in rehearsed theatrical shock. "Oh my God, it's true," Funk shrieked. She had juju in her room all along. Dara walked forward, her face a mask of triumph. "So, Esther," she said, her voice dripping with venom, "you still deny it, even after Mama has found it hidden in your room, you liar, you witch." Fam, they did it, they planted it, they brought their own juju and planted it right under her nose. My blood is, I am shaking right now. This is a setup of the highest order. Esther is trapped, Tommy is a witness, but who will believe a 15-year-old girl against 3 women and a spiritual expert? This is dark, this is deep. If your heart is pounding like mine, hit that like button now. I need to know you're here with me, and drop a comment. How can Esther possibly prove her innocence now? What would you do if you were her? Don't forget to subscribe, fam. You must be here for the rest of this. The House of Cards is about to come crashing down. Let's get back to this mess. That is not mine, Esther screamed, finding her voice in a rush of desperate panic. I swear on my mother's grave, I swear on that Bible, madam, you put it there, you and this woman, this is a lie. The word hung in the air, sharp and dangerous. Dara's face, which had been twisted in a victorious smirk, went blank. Then her eyes narrowed to slits. She drew back her hand and slapped Esther across the face. The sound was sharp like a firecracker echoing through the house. Esther cried out, stumbling back, her hand flying to her stinging cheek. How dare you? Dara screamed, her voice hoarse with rage. How dare you accuse me, you evil, ungrateful snake? We caught you red-handed and you still have the mouth to lie. Tommy, who had been frozen in shock, finally snapped. She's not lying, you are, Tommy shouted, her voice cracking. You've hated her since I got here, you're a bully and you're all liars. She fumbled in her pocket for her phone, her fingers flying to dial her dad. I'm calling Daddy, I'm going to tell him what you're doing. But before she could even press call, Funk, the woman in gold, snatched the phone from her hand. Small girl, Funk said with a nasty smile. You want to call your daddy? Good, let him come, he will see the truth for himself. He needs to see the kind of demon he brought into his home. The mama, who had been watching all this with a cold detachment, began to untie the knot on the black and red pouch. Let us see the work of her hands, she chanted. She turned the pouch over and into her palm fell its contents, a few strands of dark hair, clearly a man's, a tiny, square piece of paper with a name written on it, and a small, folded, blurry photograph. Dara snatched the photo. It was a picture of Carlos, small and grainy, cut out from a larger family photo. See, Dara shrieked, holding it up. She cut my husband's picture, she is using his hair, she is trying to tie him to kill me and take my place. Mama, isn't that so? The mama nodded gravely. It is a powerful binding charm, an abomination. This girl is full of darkness. Esther was on the floor now, sobbing, her body shaking. It's a lie, it's a lie, it's a lie. God help me, it's a lie. You are finished in this house, Esther, Dara said, her voice dropping to a low, cold whisper. She grabbed Esther's arm, her nails digging in. You are finished in Lagos. I will make sure of it. Get your things. No, you will leave with nothing. Get out of my house. She began to drag Esther, who was too weak and shocked to resist, out of the room. "Let go of her," Tommy yelled, trying to pull Dara's hand off Esther. It was a scene of total chaos, Dara dragging Esther, Tommy pulling at her stepmother, the friends shouting, "Out, witch, out," and the mama chanting, "Be gone, be gone." And that is the exact moment that Carlos walked in. He stopped dead in the front doorway. His briefcase hit the marble floor with a soft thud. He stared at the scene. His wife, who was supposed to be gone, was back. Her friends were here. There was a strange woman in his living room, chanting. His daughter, Tommy, was crying and pulling at her stepmother. And Esther, his maid, was on her knees in the hallway, her face red with a handprint, her room completely destroyed, and a small, sinister pile of juju items lying on the floor between them. He had no context. He had missed the setup. He had missed the search. He had missed the slap. He had walked in only in time for the verdict. Dara's head snapped up. Her face, which had been a mask of rage, instantly crumpled into the performance of a lifetime. Tears welled in her eyes. She let go of Esther and ran to her husband. "Carlos," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "Oh, thank God you are home. You won't believe it. Carlos, look what we found." She pointed a shaking, accusing finger at Esther, who was still gasping for breath on the floor. This witch, she has been trying to tie you. She has been using juju on you this whole time." Carlos stood frozen, his arms stiffly at his sides, Dara sobbing against his chest. He looked at his crying wife. He looked at the chanting stranger. He looked at the damning proof on the floor. And then his eyes lifted and met Esther's. She was looking at him, her eyes wide, filled with terror and pleading for him to see the truth. He was a man of logic, a man of business, but he was standing in the middle of a war of superstition, and he was being forced to make an impossible choice. Who would he believe, the wife who had abandoned him or the maid who had served him? The truth wouldn't set anyone free. It was about to bury them all. The entire mansion held its breath. It was a single, frozen, terrible moment. Carlos stood in the doorway, a statue of black granite, his face unreadable. Dara was attached to his chest, sobbing her accusations. The mama was chanting, her eyes closed, holding the evidence. And Esther was on the floor, a broken, silent plea, her eyes locked on the one man who could either save her or destroy her. This is the story of a choice. The moment a man had to decide between the lie he wanted to believe and the truth he was terrified to see. Carlos's eyes, cold and sharp, moved from the juju on the floor to Esther's terror-filled face, then to his wife, who was crying into his expensive suit. He finally, slowly looked at his daughter. Tommy was standing by the stairs. Her face streaked with tears, but her eyes were blazing with a fire that matched his own. And her phone, which Funk still held, was in her hand. The screen lit up. She had been recording. "Carlos," Dara wailed, pulling at his arm. "Did you hear me? She's a witch. I have proof. Get her out of our home. Call the police." Carlos didn't move. His voice, when it came, was dangerously quiet. "Dara," he said, his voice flat, "let go of me." She froze, the sobs hitched in her throat. What did you say?" "I said," he repeated, still not raising his voice, "let go of me." He gently but firmly detached her hands from his shirt, straightening his suit. He was not a man to be controlled by hysteria, and his businesslike calm suddenly felt more threatening than any shout. He looked at the mama. Who are you?" The mama's chanting stopped. She opened her eyes, clearly not used to being questioned. "I am Mama K, a child of the river. I am here to cleanse this house of the darkness." "And who invited you into my home?" Carlos asked, his eyes narrowing. "I did," Dara cut in, her voice shrill. "I brought her, Carlos, to save you, to save our marriage from this thing." She pointed at Esther again. "Daddy, she's lying," Tommy suddenly shouted, her voice breaking. "She's lying, she's lying, she's lying." Tommy ran from the stairs and stood, small and shaking, between her father and Esther. She pointed right at Dara. "She's the liar. She brought these people here to plant that. They tore up Esther's room. I saw them. They're fakes, Daddy, all of them." "Shut up, you stupid child," Funk hissed from the side. "You don't know what you're talking about." "Don't you ever," Carlos's voice dropped to a lethal whisper, his eyes snapping to Funk, "speak to my daughter that way. In fact, why are you in my house?" Funk and Shade recoiled, their faces suddenly pale. The power dynamic in the room had just tilted on a knife's edge. Carlos looked at the juju on the floor, the hair, the picture. He was a logical man, a man of contracts and numbers. This was a circus. So, he said, looking at Dara, you who stormed out of this house, you just happened to come back today with a spiritualist and your friends, and you just happened to find this charm in the maid's room, the same maid you've been trying to destroy since I gave her a birthday present. Dara's eyes widened, her performative tears drying up. She was losing the script. Carlos, you can't be defending her, look at the proof. I am looking, Carlos said. He knelt not at the juju but in front of Esther, who was still on the floor, trembling. He looked at the red handprint on her face, still bright and angry. He looked into her terrified, swollen eyes. Esther, he asked, his voice now gentle, did my wife hit you? Esther couldn't speak. She just sobbed, a new wave of tears coming, and nodded. It was the nod that broke the spell. Carlos stood up slowly. The air in his lungs seemed to turn to fire. The kindness that Tommy and Esther saw in him was real, but the world had forgotten the cold, hard anger that had built his empire. Dara, he said, his voice void of all emotion. You slapped a girl, an orphan you know has no one, in my home to cover a lie. You brought these performers. He waved a hand at the mama and the two friends. You brought them here and you desecrated my house, all because I gave a maid 500,000 naira. She deserved it? Dara shrieked, her mask of the victim finally shattering, revealing the pure, ugly jealousy underneath. You were defending her, you were buying her clothes, you were replacing me with trash. She's not trash, Tommy yelled. She's a better person than you will ever be. Get out, Carlos said. Dara froze. What? I wasn't talking to you, Carlos said, his eyes still on his wife. I was talking to them. He pointed to Shade, Funk, and the mama. Get out of my house, now. He strode to the intercom by the door and pressed the button for the gate. Abel, he said, his voice hard as steel, come to the main house, I have trash to be removed. The mama, seeing her paycheck vanish, quickly gathered her things. You will regret this house is cursed. Out, Carlos roared, his voice finally exploding, shaking the chandeliers. The three women scrambled out the front door just as the security guard, Abel, ran up. Sorry. Make sure they leave the compound, Carlos ordered. He shut the door. And then there were four. Fam, he did it, he kicked them out, he saw the truth. My heart is, oh my goodness, I can finally breathe. But fam, the war is not over. The vipers are out of the house, but the main snake, the queen cobra, is still standing right there in the living room. Dara is cornered, and a cornered snake is the most dangerous. We are at the final showdown, the climax. If you have been on this journey, if you are feeling this story deep in your spirit, please, I'm asking you, hit that like button right now. Let me know you're here for this finale. And don't you dare move, because what happens next? This is the end of the line, let's finish this. The silence that fell was absolute. It was just Carlos, Dara, Tommy, and Esther. Dara stared at her husband, her face a mixture of shock and pure, unadulterated hatred. So, she whispered, her voice venomous, that's it, you choose them. You choose a 15-year-old child and a village maid over your own wife. Carlos walked to his study, took a checkbook from his desk, and walked back. He didn't say a word, he just started writing. Talk to me, Carlos, Dara screamed. Don't you walk away from me. After everything I did for you, everything I built with you, you throw me away for a N10000 a month servant. He finished writing, tore the check out, and held it out to her. This is for your troubles, Dara, it's more than you deserve. Dara looked at the check, then at his face, and she laughed. It was a high, hysterical, terrifying sound. Money, you think you can solve this with money? You are a fool, Carlos, a rich, blind fool. No, Dara, Carlos said, his voice infinitely tired. You are the fool. You thought my kindness was weakness. You thought my silence was agreement. You were so jealous of a 22-year-old girl that you manufactured a lie that a child could see through. You didn't just storm out, Dara, you plotted. You came back not for me but for a fight. You wanted to humiliate her. He shook his head. You just humiliated yourself. He walked past her and went to Esther, who was still huddled near the stairs. He held out his hand. Esther, he said softly. She flinched, not used to this. It's okay, he said, his voice kind. Get up, you are safe. Hesitantly, her small, trembling hand reached out and took his. He gently, respectfully helped her to her feet. That was the moment it all broke, seeing him help her. So that's how it is, Dara shrieked, finally dropping all pretense. My God, I was right. You are sleeping with her, you're sleeping with the maid. Before Carlos could even react, Tommy stepped forward. He's not, you're just a sick, jealous person, you're the one who left. This is my house, Dara screamed at Tommy. You are just a guest here from a failed marriage, and you, she turned on Esther, her face contorted, you will be begging on the streets of Ashodi by tomorrow. I will ruin you, I will. You will do nothing, Carlos said, his voice a blade that cut through her hysteria. Because you will not be allowed in this compound. Our marriage is over, Dara, this time for good. My lawyers will be in touch with you. He pointed to the door. Leave, your performance is over. Dara stared at him, her chest heaving. She was looking for one sign of weakness, one crack she could slip into. She found none. His face was set. It was done. Her eyes scanned the room, the life she was losing. She looked at Tommy, at Esther, and at the man she had lost. With a final, animalistic sob of pure rage, she turned, ripped the door open, and was gone. The slam of the door for the second time echoed through the house, but this time it was not a threat. It was a release. Carlos let out a breath he felt he had been holding for years. He turned to Esther, his face full of shame and deep, profound regret. Esther, he said, using the Yoruba pronunciation of her name. I have no words. I cannot apologize enough for what you have endured in my house. You are a good girl. You are like a daughter to me, and I failed to protect you. I am so sorry. Esther, her tears finally slowing, just looked at him, her eyes still wide. She was free. The nightmare was over. A few weeks later, the house was quiet, but it was a real, peaceful quiet. Dara was gone, her name only spoken in whispers by lawyers. Tommy was packing her bags, her 2-week trip having turned into a month-long rescue mission. She was going back to Abuja. She found Esther in the kitchen, but Esther wasn't in her maid's uniform. She was in her jeans, packing a new school bag. So, Tommy said, leaning against the counter, smiling, "First day of school, big girl." Esther looked up and her smile was no longer hesitant or small. It was bright and it reached her eyes. "Yes," she said, her voice clear. "Computer college, I'm starting today." Carlos had kept his word. He had apologized not just in words but in action. He had given Esther the 500,000 naira and then, in a separate envelope, a check that would cover her first 2 years of tuition and housing. "You're not going to work here anymore?" Tommy asked. "No," Esther said, zipping up her bag. "Your father, sir, he gave me a new life." The two girls, one the boss's daughter, one the former maid, stood in silence for a moment. Then Tommy stepped forward and gave Esther a tight hug. "You take care of yourself, Esther. Don't let anyone ever treat you like that again." Esther hugged her back, holding on tight. "I won't, thank you, Tommy, you saved my life." "Nah," Tommy said, pulling back, trying to look tough. "You saved yourself, I just talked loud." Esther walked out of the Lekki mansion, not through the back door but through the grand front entrance. She stepped out into the bright Lagos sun, her school bag on her back. She was no longer a shadow. She was no longer a victim. The juju, it turned out, was never in the black and red pouch. It was in the poison of a heart that had forgotten how to be kind. And the most powerful charm in the world, the one that had truly changed a life. It was a simple birthday gift, and it was just the beginning.